Welcome into the channel, everyone. Today I'm going to be giving the best advice that I could give anybody when it comes to a double extra heavy wall or the monster coupon combo weld TIG and stick. Let's get into it. Now before we get into actually welding this heavy wall coupon, I want you to understand why you're doing it in the first place. Per ASME section 9, as far as the welding code, we're going to follow the 2-inch monster combo test. A combo test meaning we're going to use two processes, TIG welding and stick welding, on the same piece of pipe. Kind of confusing part is they call this a monster coupon or double extra heavy, XXH heavy wall pipe. I don't know exactly the schedule on that. I think it's close to 120. It's about 0.625 or 5/8 as far as the wall thickness. Why 2-inch in the first place? Well, to a company man, 2-inch is harder to weld than a 10-inch pipe or a 12-inch pipe or 24-inch, 48-inch. It's harder to weld this smaller one than it is those bigger ones. A 2-inch pipe will qualify you to weld all sizes of pipe and plate. Pipe is always going to certify you for structural stuff, and 1-inch OD pipe. So nothing smaller than 1-inch, but all the way up to unlimited when it comes to pipe. So that's why we're taking it on a 2-inch piece of pipe. Why the 6G position? Because it's going to qualify you for all position welding for both of these processes, TIG and stick. Because you're only putting a TIG root and hot pass in here, you're only allowed about a 1/4 inch max as far as what you're technically allowed to weld out there. But for stick, because we're finishing it up with stick, you have unlimited thicknesses with your stick. This one test will allow you to do so much on the one job site, and that's why it's the bread and butter of the pipe welder single hand weld tests. Now, where do you get any of this stuff? If you're local to the Houston area like I am, you can grab these monster coupons from Outlaw Leather over in Pasadena, Texas. They also have them on the website, so you can grab them there too. They have a bunch of other stuff to weld on, like 6-inch Schedule 40 carbon steel and stainless steel, as well as some 6-inch Schedule 80 carbon steel. If you're looking for some other stuff, they have welding caps, hood, gloves, FR shirts, jack stands, fit up tools. It's a full-on weld supply, so you can pretty much find anything you want, including one of their awesome custom hoods. Now let's get back to the shop. I felt like getting some fresh air today and letting this Ranger 330 MPX get a little breathing room sitting on a trailer. I listened to you guys and I went ahead and we're gonna go with the trailer route instead of putting a skid in the back of the truck. I found this nice bad boy on Facebook Marketplace. It's the old military generator trailer. That being said, we're gonna get this puppy started, put a little choke on her, and then I've got my welding table over here. This little fold out table from Lincoln is pretty cool. It's got all the little fixture points. That's what we're gonna work off of. Go ahead and hit up TIG welding. We're gonna definitely turn it up, probably to put our tacks and everything in, probably about 100 amps. When it comes to welding with this stuff, we want to be on DC negative. Our stinger is going to be in the negative terminal, and we're going to run it to the adapter block for our TIG torch, while the positive is going to be run to our table. We're going to be using some Lincoln 1/8 TIG wire, 70S6, and some 332/78 Excaliburs. If you're just getting started with this weld, use 332. They usually give you the option. Don't try to push some 1/8 in there. It just ends up being a little bit more challenging than you'd like. We got the machine set up. We've got our coupons on the table. Now it's time to get everything tacked. So we've got our argon on, or we got our stinger hooked up to the adapter block. If you're just starting out, just go ahead and cut these long wires in half. They tend to be a little bit, a little bit unstable with all that weight on the back end. We're not gonna need a lot. We'll probably only need 2 wires cut up. We're gonna put in 3 tacks. I like 3 tacks. Some people run 2, some people run 4. I'm gonna run 3 tacks on this piece of pipe. We're gonna get fit up with a 5/32 or 3/16 gap. I don't have a land on this piece of pipe. I don't want to land on this piece of pipe, but if I did want a little bit bigger gap, I probably might put a little bitty tiny land on there. I want to make sure it always has room to come through. It's nice having one of these openings like this on the actual table itself because it lines up the pipe for me, so there's no high-low. If you don't have something like this, just get you a little piece of angle iron that's about that long, only some 1-inch, and you can pretty much tack up anything in a test lab or wherever you're at. But now let's put some tacks in.
I have a little bit of a breeze going on around me at this point, so I've turned my argon up a significant amount. When we tack this, we want to make sure we have a decent tack in there. Not too long, just dabbing it in, grabbing both walls. We only need about 1/4 inch. Putting this second tack right across from the first one, we try and keep those gaps on either side as even as possible. At this point, I need to decide which side is going to be top and which side is going to be bottom. I have a little bit of a wider gap on one side, so I decided to make that one my bottom. We're putting another tack on the top side, and I personally prefer a wider gap on the bottom side so that I can feed more wire while I'm in that 6G position. With the top side, gravity is going to be taking care of things, so we don't really want a wide gap up there.
Now, the best advice I can give about after you've got it fit up and put it in position, make sure you've got it in a spot that's easy to weld. It's not always going to be easy to weld when you actually have to weld whatever they give you. But for this, we don't necessarily want to get scrunched up underneath it. We want to be able to get up on a knee, not both knees, because we want to be able to move around this pipe and stand up. You've got to plan for where you're going to finish, and ideally we'd like to finish from bottom all the way to the top. We can stop if we have to, but ideally we kind of want to make it in one run. Always have your body positioned on the side of the pipe that you want to do. Right now I'm at the bottom of it. That's where a lot of people want to start, is right here. But once they make it, shoot, half an inch, then they can't see and they're trying to see what they're doing. You need to get comfortable right here on the side of the pipe. That way, whenever you get this bottom, you might be in a little bit of a bind, but you're working towards where you want to be. You could stop, pull out that wire on that tack, and jump up, and then you can keep welding. The other advice I'll give you is always start with your hard side. Now on your hard side, being if you don't want to use your left hand, you got to do something a little bit funkier in order to get up and around that pipe. So I like to do that part first. That way I can do the easy part second. And I'm going to do that the entire way out. And it just makes the bottom look way better. Let's put a bead in it. I'm going to pull my tungsten out a little bit further so I can reach in there, because you can freehand things, and you can run something like this Outlaw Leather TIG finger. And when I first got started, I felt like I always needed to freehand that first bottom. And having that TIG finger on there really helps keep the heat off your hands. But if I had a preference, I'd rather walk everything, and that's what we're going to try to do today. Again, I got my body on this side. It's a little awkward. You either got to plan to be awkward with your body or with your hands by switching to your left hand and going up. I am kind of holding my wire towards the back side edge of those bevels. I don't want my wire to be too much further out than that. I want it to be as deep as possible in order to get reinforcement. And even just holding it there, I'm not getting that much. And then when I start coming up to this tack, I'm going to consume that tack and put it into my root. This hole right here that I just closed up, I just left a low spot. But if I hold my heat right on that tack, then I could pull that tack down into that low spot. Reintroduce my wire at the top. I'm going to go tighter and a little slower in order to let that root just fall in. Once I get to that top tack, I'm going to hold my heat. I'm going to look at it from the top, and I'm just going to slowly wash over that tack until I see it roll back on me. And then we got the root in. Got a little piece of cold wire, but nothing that's not manageable. Alright, let's get this other side in. I'm going to come up to the bottom of my weld, and I got enough room in there to really feed into this bottom a good bit. I want to feed into it, make sure it gets the wire it needs, and then I'm going to keep that wire towards that back side just like the other side. Oh, get my tungsten. Not a big deal. Just make sure you give it enough time to melt that edge that you just ripped out of, otherwise you're going to leave a fisheye or a little crack or something. But hopefully with the camera pointing inside, you'll see what I'm trying to do. When I get to these tacks, I'm going to hold my heat right there. I really can just wait forever as long as I don't go wide with it. And then I'm just going to take the meat of that tack and pull it in. Once that tack rolls back, I know that I've got it. And I can reintroduce that wire, give it a little shove, not a stab, and then I can keep going. Again, across the top, we want to be, I got a breeze coming through, so I'm stopping. We can relight back up. Just make sure you get that spot hot again. And then when we get to the top of our bevel, I want to see my wire, my puddle sink into the top. And then when I get to this last little hole, I'm going to shove a little bit of wire, and I just want it to sink. I don't want to go wide to the left, to the right, up or down. I just need that chunk to sink in and blend in to this other tie-in. And then once I can, I'll come up to the bevel edge and pull out. I've got to admit, I'm not super proud of how that root pass looks. It has been a while since I put one in. A little sloppy, but it'll shoot. It'll shoot. The next thing we'll do is just put in the hot pass. The only advice I'll give for a hot pass is if your root's fine, there's nothing to do but just put a pass in it. Put some meat on it, because when we switch to stick, we need some material there that we can sit on so that 7018 don't dig right through and put a hole in it. So I got the machine 175 right now, and I'm gonna carry some filler with it. I'm not just gonna lay it on, I'm gonna carry some. One big thing when you're putting your hot pass in a 6G position is keep that wire to the top side of your root, and every time you come up to it, just make sure you get some wire before you go down that bottom piece of pipe, because the last thing we want to do is put a hole into our weld with that stick weld. Again, just trying to hold that wire to the top side, feed into it to pull it down, and then when we get to the end of it, we've got a lot of wire in there and we can pull up to the top. Damn breeze came through and caught my last little bit of shielding, so I'll have to grind out a pinhole. All right, now that we're done with the TIG welding, we can switch the machine over to stick, run about 90 amps for these 332 7018s. We can take our stinger off our adapter block, get that off. The biggest thing is we got to make sure our polarities are switched. Right now my ground is plugged into the positive, so I'll just disconnect the jumpers and then I'll swap them so that now my stinger is in the positive and my ground is in the negative, and I'm running DC positive. Now we're good to go. Now when you're switching over to stick and you're about to get started, best advice I could give anyone is just make a plan. You're supposed to plan out these welds. You got a lot of bevel to fill. These 332s don't fill fast, but they're really easy to manage. The likelihood of you being able to use one entire rod on one side and then the other is pretty much not gonna happen. And we all know that if we put our rod in at the 90 here, and we try to make our weld, we got to come around this entire thing and really pick up that elbow in order to maintain an angle. What I'd rather do instead, grab in front of the numbers, get some of the flux off the rod, put it in at 45 down, and then all you got to do is point where you want to do and roll your wrist. You really don't have to pull your elbow up and around anywhere. That's going to make the same thing for over here on your hard side. With TIG, we have to use two hands. Well, I might be right-handed, but to do my left side, I could still hold it in my right hand. I'm just gonna kind of steer it with my left. The other way you could do it is still, as long as you're on this side of the pipe and lean into it from this way, you can still do it with just your right hand. The first plan of attack is not putting a bead right over the hot pass, but instead favoring the bottom toe, and then we'll put in the top toe. Always doing our hard side first. The biggest thing that you need to take notice of is by the time I get to the top, I'm on my tippy toes trying to lean forward, trying to see. If at one point I could have had this foot over here, then I could have easily seen over top of that weld. It wouldn't have been so uncomfortable, but we still got the bead on. Now when you do the one side, most people would do the other side. No one actually said anywhere that you had to do one bead, then the other bead, then one bead, then the other bead. You could just do these two beads, and then these two beads, and then these three beads, and then these three beads. That's gonna help cut down on a lot of the weld time instead of having to swap around every single time you go. But before you do the other side, you should locate that little knot, the start of your original weld. Sometimes it could just be like a fusion or just a big bump. And if you have one bump and you go to put another bump on top of it, now you just got a bigger freaking bump. So grind that bump down to make it look like a crater, which you're normally used to tying into. That way your tie-in comes in a lot smoother as you strike up ahead of it, come back to it, and come up that piece of pipe. So that's what we'll do here. Make sure you get it, you grind it down, and then we're gonna line up where we think we're gonna finish. Lean into that bottom, easy peasy, light up ahead, come back, tie in, slow and steady on that bottom toe of that hot pass. Rotating that wrist as we come around, moving our head as we come around. Our body should never stop. Our hands don't stop, so neither does our body. Give it a quick jimmy. And we're just gonna go ahead and keep putting some weld on there. And we're gonna aim for that top toe this time. That pipe's gonna get pretty hot, so some welders will have to just shove a file in it. That way they don't burn up their arm. You're gonna aim for that top toe, trying to fill in the remaining area, trying to keep that weld very centered into our two bevels. Now after you put your first stick pass in there, got plenty of metal in there where you can start definitely carrying a little bit more metal if you want. As you plan your way out on this heavy weld, there's still a lot of welding to be done. Definitely check the sides, trying to make sure that you're on each bevel evenly. Look at the side this way. Typically your bottom fills up a little bit faster than your top. You can mitigate that as you go and grind as you go, or you can kind of just keep going. Just as long as you keep things clean, keep things hot, you should be fine, and then get closer to the last fill and we can start cleaning things up and getting things even. We're going to do nothing different from those two stick passes. If you want to be fast about it, you can do one side at once. So we can do 3 beads on this side, we can come down here and clean all 3 of those up and then come up this side right here. Or you can alternate, it really doesn't matter. So now that we know all these things, we got a lot of welding to do. I did go ahead and adjust the hot start on my machine. Turned it up a little bit so they have some smoother tie-ins on the bottom here. As you work your way out on a heavy wall, again, you're just looking around it. Make sure you're keeping things nice and even. There's no rule that says you have to do 2 beads, then 3 beads, then 4 beads, then 5 beads. I just did 3 and then 3 on top of those 3 because I couldn't fit the 4. And if you're looking around this coupon, you're looking around, you look good, you've cleaned up the bottom. You see something like this guy right here, that little bit of lack of fusion, that roll in that bead, I want to grind that out. Anything that I see, porosity, any roll of a bead, anything that's too heavy, just go ahead and grind it smooth before you move on. If the whole layer is all messed up, grind the whole layer smooth. We're going to try to avoid that at all costs. Now, one of the next questions you're probably going to have to ask yourself as you get towards the end of this is, am I ready to cap? And that's a tricky question because even on my coupon today, I haven't been even all the way out. My bottom is almost always a little heavier than my top just for the way gravity pulls everything. And same thing with my sides, they're a little bit different than the top. The top is the lowest point and it technically, I think, needs another fill in order to be cappable. I could try to slow down a lot and cap it, but if you cap too early, you're going to lead to problems like underfill and undercut, and we don't want that. So we want it to be nice and flush before capping. But if there's any part of my weld that's, you know, not flush, and it's a little bit heavy, and the rest of it's a little lower, then no big deal. I'm just gonna grind it out. So that's what I've done on this layer, is I've went and ground out a lot of the heavy spots to try to match everything up before I put this final fill in here that should get everything nice and flat. Again, if you want a nice, flat, smooth cap, you've got to weld over something nice, smooth, and flat. Now this is more like it. We did another pass, same 4 beads that we did underneath this. So technically we did root, a hot pass, we did 2 beads, and then 3 beads, and then 3 beads, and then 4 beads, and then 4 beads. That's what got us flush. We had to take some grinding on the bottom again because it was still heavy. I want this to look identical all the way around. Now, in order to keep things a little bit neater on the cap, because this is what's going to be visible for the QC to see, and some things that he's going to be looking for are staggered tie-ins. So unlike before where we really weren't paying too much attention where tie-ins started or stopped, definitely going to make it more of an effort on this one. And we want them to stagger. We don't want them like we got across the top where we all stopped in the same spot. We don't want to start in the same spot. And that's how you're going to end up being able to stagger in them in the first place. If you always start somewhere new, you're going to have to finish somewhere new. Instead of doing all 5 beads on this side, then all 5 on this one, I am going to one it, grind it, one it. Only because I want it to look nice. And up until this point, all of your welding, all of your grinding is staying inside those 2 bevel lines. I have went outside, none of it. That way you keep everything nice and neat. Keep it nice and tight, nice and filled in, nice and overlapped. I do this little fish hook with this stinger right now. Make that out of my rod, so I grab 2 points because this stinger's kind of worn out. And that kind of helps. Reach as far as I can over, using that bottom line as a guide. This is going to take a little bit longer than what we've been doing, but it's going to make sure everything looks nice and pretty for the QC. Look for my last tie-in, make sure I'm a little bit over from it, and I don't put that start right in the same place. Just do that 3 more times. All the welding is done. There's a couple things that you might want to do after looking at your weld. Pretty much always, while it's hot, go ahead and take your file, and it's called cutting in your weld. You just kind of take that file and run it forward. They say you're not supposed to run it backwards, but you can dull your file that way. But we're looking to see if there's any amount of undercut or uneven toes. And then of course, we definitely want to give it a jimmy. And again, you're the QC first. You should be looking at this weld up and down, looking for any low spots. I would say most QCs are a little bit more forgiving when it comes to, you know, the height of your weld. If it's a little heavy, they'll probably take a little heavy. They don't want to see a speck of it under. I like to take the wire wheel and push it into the toes where I made those file marks to kind of smear them. If you happen to see a little arc mark, a little arc strike, just go ahead and rub that file across. You see something wrong with it, fix it before they come over. They definitely don't have to tell you about it. There is one low spot I would call myself on it. And if this is the case before the QC came over, all you gotta do is put a little bit of weld, take your grinder and blend it. You're still allowed to grind on the cap. They might tell you you're not allowed to. And in that case, you might have to live with it. But that one little spot is all it takes for them to be like, don't give them that opportunity. Whew. And that's gonna be it for today's episode, y'all. I hope you got some decent advice out of that. I haven't welded one of those in a long time, but every job that I got in a new construction, power plant, refinery, one of these was mandatory. It was pretty much the minimum in order to become a combo pipe welder. Body position, getting comfortable, planning for where you're going, not for where you're at. There's a lot of stuff involved to make this hard weld a lot easier. I hope you guys really enjoyed that. Don't forget to check out all the links in the description below from a lot of our partners right now. Got some deals going on. We got some really cool rebates from Lincoln Electric. All you gotta do is click the links down below. We'll see you guys on the next weld. Don't give them that opportunity. Why are you barking?